First of all, we'd like to welcome Maurice Riley and Ms. Melissa Moss from the Australian Press Club. We're very pleased to have as visitors today. Thank you also, as usual, to Heineken, our treasured sponsors, and to the Ben and Shirley Rabinowitz Foundation, and to Martin Hess for sponsoring journalists' attendance at our functions. We also have today diplomatic representatives from Britain, France, India, Netherlands, Peru, and Russia, as well as members of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. We have many members of the press demonstrating a great interest in RISE Mzansi's message. And we have two new members to welcome this week, Mrs. Mary Burton and Mrs. Sheila Frater. If I can just announce some upcoming events. First of all, a very important event that I would very much like you to diarize. We have Valentina one of the parties that is being courted by the ANC and the DA and may play a significant role, along with our guests today, in any potential coalition negotiations. And that's next Tuesday, the 16th. On the 25th, we have Shamila Patoy and Anton Duplessis from the NPA, who will be talking about the NPA's role and presumably explaining how it is functioning and how its rebuilding is progressing. On the 30th of April, we have Arthur Goldstuck, who's going to talk to us about AI and whether we should be scared about it, hopefully in the context of the election and fears about potential manipulation and influence in the electoral process. On the 17th of May, we have veteran former columnist Solly Moeng, who will be joining us to talk about civil society and its role in the election. On the 22nd of May, Herman Mashaba from Action SA will be talking to us about his party's readiness for the polls and the role he expects to play. And on Monday, the 27th of May, we have Patricia de Lille from the Good Party. So those are our impending engagements at this busy period. And I do encourage you all to take out a bank loan and attend as many as possible of these as you can, because these are very exciting elections and we're lucky to have so many important speakers. On that note, I would like to welcome our speaker today, Songezo Zibi from RISE Mzansi, who has a long and distinguished history in a variety of fields, including as one of my employers as editor of Business Day. He's worked in the corporate sector primarily in his career, but he's branched out into many other fields, and he's written two very engaging books about contemporary politics and leadership in South Africa. Now he's launched this new venture, a political party that may play a very significant role in this fast-changing political landscape. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Zibi.
Thank you, Anthony. Honored guests, journalists past and present, and colleagues from RISE Mzansi. What Anthony is not telling you is that we were also paying him slave wages at the Business Day, because columnists don't get paid very much. But they often get insulted on social media for doing this because they're getting paid. and I wouldn't correct people lest they come for me as the editor for paying them so little. But good afternoon, and I'm sorry to interrupt your lunch, but I'm hoping that we're going to have a very good conversation today. So I had a really good friend, a childhood friend, Tandom Tim. He died in 1993 at 18. I was 17. And the last image of him, which is imprinted in my mind, is a news segment on what was then TV1 of his body being wheeled out of a house not far from my mother's, with rigor mortis having set in, and his arm, which I recognized quite well, sticking out of the blanket that covered his body. And he was murdered together with 4 others, all of them young. 2 12-year-olds, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, and him. And they'd been called terrorists by the former government. That image has never left my mind at all. So a couple of years ago, I was talking to someone I like very much. So this is by no means an attempt to denigrate this person, but for the purposes of some of what we're going to talk about today, I think it's important to mention that he's an Afrikaner. And he's also liberal in the sense that he believes in democracy, he loves our constitution, and he loves freedom. And so he and I have a lot in common, which is why we get along. And I was telling him about my political thoughts and what kind of interventions I thought would be necessary in South African politics. And he felt it necessary to remind me that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are important. I couldn't process it because I was like, of course, they're really important. My life experience, many life experiences I've had, and I don't want to bore you with gory details, is littered with tales of extrajudicial killings and gross human rights violations in my family and of people close to my family. But it betrayed something, which is that there appears to be a lingering thought at the back of his mind and many, many others that perhaps people like me cannot be trusted to love this constitution just as much. And that our own story disappears into the background in the face of this fear that if you are black, you may not be so friendly to chapter 2 of our constitution, which is the Bill of Rights. Anyway, we still get along very well. It was just an observation which I shared with him. And I also advised him to try and not do something like that again. Because it is in those unspoken conversations that we don't get to understand each other. Because we don't see each other. We don't see each other's experiences. And we mistrust one another on the basis of how we look and on the basis of our own fears, which may have any number of origins. So I stand before you as a freshly minted black radical who wants to take away property rights in South Africa. Me, former editor of the Business Day, senior official in a commercial bank and an investment bank and a mining company and a car manufacturing company. Me. But that's the South Africa in which we live. We don't know each other. Sometimes we refuse to know each other, or we decline the opportunity to get to know each other, to understand one another's experiences. Thank you very much. So it keeps moving. Thank you. So some weeks ago, we hosted one of our street meetings in Alex, in Joburg, in Alexandra. A young man spoke of the dread he feels every morning when he has to wake up and get out of the house. No work, no recreation, no options, and no hope. Just a day filled with nothingness. He told me how sometimes he tries to stay in bed as long as possible so that he doesn't have to step outside his mother's house, which he shares with his grandmother and his aunt and his cousins. And if you know anything about Alex, you will know that that already is too many people to share a single space in Alex. And so he says he doesn't want to step out and stare into this whole load of nothing where he looks left, he sees a sports field that no longer is usable. And if he looks right, there might be a drug peddler or worse walking down his way. But his life and his existence is peppered with really long days that can feel like weeks, and weeks feel like months, and months feel like years, and a year can feel like a lifetime. And he was saying this because a mother had shared her own frustration with her son's drug addiction. And she was feeling that her son doesn't understand how much she works for him. And this youngster felt that the woman was not his mother, doesn't understand the mental anguish he goes through, and the son goes through, and the other youngsters under that tree go through. So everyone is feeling powerless. The young man said nobody cares because they don't see us. They don't know what we go through, meaning their own parents and meaning the politicians as well. Now, I wish I could tell you that the Alex experience was isolated, but I'm afraid I hear a version of this every time I visit a community or we do home visits in any of our 9 provinces. These are the stories of families, 3 generations to a single room, homes that have untreated sewage running down the street, where children also play, that have no income whatsoever besides social grants. This is a reality that is as true for many in Cape Town as it is true for people in the city of eThekwini, where I was last weekend. These are the stories of people who cannot wait and must no longer wait for the dignity that our Constitution promises all of us. Taking their political and life aspirations seriously is an ethical and compassionate imperative for all of us. It is a practical one too. South Africa is the most unequal country on earth. And none of our children will thrive or be safe unless, as RISE Mzansi puts it, we bring about a safe, prosperous, equal, and united South Africa within the next generation. This requires smart policy choices. It needs effective, clean government, but most of all, it needs new leaders with the will and the vision and the talent to make it happen. These are leaders with the roots, the empathy, and the commitment to give people hope again, so that they once more can participate in our democracy, and so that they can exercise their own agency, so that they can work at bettering their own lives and those of the communities that host their homes. This is what we have lost. This is what we need to reclaim. In every home I visit, I ask my hosts when last they ate, and I'm usually told that there is only 1 meal a day. Sometimes at this time of the day or later, people tell me they last ate yesterday. And I look at the small children, not older than 7, staring at my face in that conversation. And I see the faces of my own children in their faces. And it breaks me. This is said with resignation rather than complaint. Hunger has become just a fact of South African life, like load shedding, and increasingly not having water. How did we come to this? I've given a lot of thought to why people keep voting for the ANC and some of the old parties, because the majority of people actually just don't turn up to vote at all. The first reason is that politics is broken. It has become transactive. People see politics as something that benefits politicians and political parties, not the people. And so they often refuse to vote if a down payment of sorts is not. What can you give us so we can give your vote? What are you going to do for us now, before the election, so that we know when we vote, we can trust you? If you don't give us anything, we are not going to vote. Increasingly, they just opt out. This means the old parties fight for a dwindling electorate and benefit from grudge votes or resigned votes, rather than an expanding and committed base of voters who believe in some version of a vision and the future they can believe in. The second reason is that there truly has been no viable alternative. People want leaders to know and understand their experience and offer solutions colored by empathy and compassion and the willingness to genuinely listen. Solutions that bring people together across race and class rather than drive them apart. To date, that alternative has not existed. The parties in the multi-party coalition or charter claim that they are going to fix South Africa, they're going to rescue it, and I am struck when I see these slogans by the way they suggest that a messiah will swoop in and sort things out. Ours is a participatory democracy, and messianic politics has long lost its credibility. People just don't trust politicians. If you care enough to get into a conversation with voters, the moment you make those kind of promises, they start playing with their phones out of politeness, but they're no longer listening. So is the DA really that messiah on the basis of its track record? And I'm using the DA because I'm in the city of Cape Town, and its leader, John Steenhuisen, has decided to pay particular attention to us and not be entirely truthful while doing so. So is the DA really that messiah on the basis of its track record here in the Western Cape? So many people in Khayelitsha and Mitchells Plain and Manenberg disagree, which is why the DA may get something of a shock next month. But let us assume it were true, to a point that service delivery is better here. I think the attitude is a total turn-off to many people in this country. There's an English word for it. It's called arrogance. Under its current leadership, at least, the DA is destined to be divisive and racialized rather than truly non-racial and representative of all South Africans. The mere fact that it uses such language as us coming into the Western Cape tells us why. It should be working to pull people together, to motivate them to become part of the solution. We need new leaders who come from communities themselves, who have legitimacy within them, who treat those communities as constituencies and represent their interests in parliament if elected and report back to them with diligence. We need new leaders who ask the people what they need rather than tell them what's good for them, who use something other than shock tactics even to marshal their own support base. It was to find such leaders that I quit my corporate career after 23 years and co-founded the Rivonia Circle. We held workshops across the country. We sat under trees. We listened. RISE Mzansi developed organically out of these conversations. And many of the people we met in the process are in our ecosystem. Some of them are candidates. They are young people who see no home in the old parties. They are determined to make their own political home. They are passionate, they are committed. Many are educated, while others not so much, but all of them are sensible. One of them is a premier candidate for this province, Axolile Notyala. He's sitting over there in that table he's looking suave next to Anthony. One day, X is going to be the president of South Africa. Don't forget his name. And yet, John calls Axolile, and by association me, mercenaries. That Axolile is coming here, where he lives. From where, I don't know. But he is coming here to loot, to steal. I am coming here to steal. I am coming here, my country, says someone from KZN. And he has said we are gangsters who are going to pillage this province. You cannot say you believe in democracy but then cry foul when someone else tries to exercise it on what you deem to be your own turf. Leave aside the entitlement of this. The idea that no one has a right to challenge a party in power is very revealing. Because when you strip all the rhetoric away, it's no different to what Angie Motshekga said about 12 years ago, that opposition parties are just an annoyance and they prevent government from doing its work. It can't be wrong with Angie and be correct with John. This is swart gevaar, because in there is a racist dog whistle. It is illiberal, it is divisive, and it is further proof that the DA under John and Helen will never reach the black voters it needs if it is to govern South Africa. This is the reason why so many credible black leaders have left the party. They want to know why you haven't joined this coalition. Well, he gave the answer himself this past weekend when he said these words. This is why we have to stay out of the tent that he is trying to build and run our own campaign. This is not to say we are petulant children who are not willing to work with other political organizations, including the DA after the election. But this attitude will have to change, because this talk reminds me of the way the apartheid regime used to call freedom fighters terrorists. If fighting for democracy, where everyone has a right to dignity, equality, and freedom, makes us terrorists or mercenaries, then we will take that label. But the people to whom such freedom matters and still don't have it know who we are. We are a viable alternative, and we represent the future. On the one side, there is the ANC that actually has its roots among the people, but has become so self-interested, corrupt, and abusive that it has become totally disconnected from these people's needs. On the other side, there is an opposition, and in the case of this province, a governing party that has alienated the majority of the voter base, and so will never be able to win the votes of people who have become disaffected with the ANC itself. Little wonder that so many voters, and particularly young voters, are seeking a third way. A small but significant number will be enticed by the demagogic politics of the EFF and MK, in the latter case driven by ethnic chauvinism too. I'm sure you will agree with me. We have to offer voters a constructive alternative to this kind of protest vote. Let me dwell on one controversial issue in particular to make my point about this: land. For us black people, land is spiritual. We bury our dead on our own family land. We perform our rituals where we live. We tell our ancestors where we've moved to. When black people say they want land justice, it is not because we hate white people. want to take away anything from anyone. We are just asking all of South Africa to see our entire being and what's important to us. And if we don't listen, if we don't find a way of instituting viable land justice, you leave people desperate and angry and open to being hoodwinked by corrupt populists who just want power. Because the same parties that spoke about expropriation without compensation a few years ago no longer mention the term, because it has outlived its usefulness. They don't care. Let me exemplify this by talking about my own village in Mkanduli. Some of our family's land was expropriated in the 1960s without compensation, dare I say, and reallocated to people who were also moved from what became pastoral land. My family doesn't walk around the village crying a river at our misfortune. Of course not. We understand that there is population growth. We understand that the old feudal systems have to give way to a more democratic allocation of space to live, to thrive, and to grow. What bothers me more is the terrible way the authorities have squandered a resource claimed for the public good. Most of the plots are derelict because there is no reticulated water for irrigation, because there is no agricultural extension support to help people understand the effects of climate change, because able-bodied people don't stay in the rural areas to do the farming, given that there is nothing to keep them there. The point I'm making is this: land reform and land justice have to be tied to informed and intelligent spatial planning and service delivery. This is our anti-populist approach to the land reform that we all know must happen. I honestly don't understand why anyone would disagree. And to clear up any confusion, I have said ad nauseum that there never was a need to change the South African Constitution. It allows for expropriation of land. It happens every day. In fact, there is a case in the courts where Shoprite is litigating the government of this province, which is expropriating land to build a road. This government is correct to do so because the Constitution says you can expropriate land for a public purpose. We merely have to believe that people having their own piece of land on which to build a home is also a legitimate constitutional public purpose. That's all. That's all. Nothing in that principle says you deprive anyone arbitrarily of their property rights. Nothing. We know it must happen because all of us surely understand the fundamental principle. The former is gutted out by cadre deployment, patronage, and corruption. The latter is too detached, too arrogant, and too entitled to legitimacy for the mere fact that the ANC has become an abomination. It also lacks a diversity of perspective that must drive governance and politics in this country. We don't want to give an already cynical electorate yet another long shopping list of promises. We want to show them how we do things differently, that we consult both people and the experts, that we are evidence-based, that we are, above all else, willing to be accountable. This is our third way, and we are convinced that it has traction. We are mapping out a future for all South Africans across the inequality divide because we see hopelessness in all quarters. Even among many of you sitting in this room who are not hungry and perhaps do have jobs. This hopelessness corrodes the soul, even when the stomach is full. Certainly, those of us who are privileged can make ourselves more comfortable by opting out of the system, private schools, private energy, healthcare, security, etc. But we know that's not an answer for the future of our children because of the way it creates even more inequality and conflict in our society. So this is my offer to South Africans today and to you in the room, that to be part of a future where people see how lives can improve because they are engaged in their own destinies through representative politics and beyond. Against the transactional policies of the old parties, we are setting out to earn the trust of the electorate. And we know it's a long journey, but we are ready for the walk. We are investing in hope, in fresh ideas, and new leaders. Whether or not we are part of a new government or on the opposition benches, we will carry on building this movement, a truly multiracial, multi-generational coalition of South Africans committed to the values of Ubuntu and social solidarity. We know powerfully from our own work on the ground that there is a hunger to work together, to contribute, to build, to grow. Hopelessness removes the motivation though. We have to fight this hopelessness more than anything, starting now. In closing, I want to say that one of the things I don't like about electoral campaigning is the fact that because there is a vote coming up, it's difficult to convince some people that we've been knocking on people's homes for a long time and talking to them about democracy, about democratic participation, about meaningful representation, about agency, about democratic institutions and why they matter and why we must protect them and why we must strengthen them, and why there is no democracy if they are not involved on an ongoing basis, not just at election time. The only thing that this election has done, the only bad thing is that it has interrupted that conversation. Because we could have it without interference of being assumed to be as opportunistic as the people who make promises they're not going to keep. But the election will soon be over, and we will continue on that journey. If we really care about democracy, surely, we have to have higher participation, more questioning voters, regardless of which political party it is, more participative voters who have agency, who want to be part of the solution actively, every day. That's what we're trying to do. We encourage people to take part in school governing bodies and so on, because those are important democratic structures they must participate in. But apparently that's radicalism. I don't get it. In the end, though, what will make a difference and will give South Africans confidence and hope is not the severity of our insults, but how we're able to speak the truth in a way that helps people to move forward together, and to do so with compassion and with consideration for the strength of our democracy. Thanks, Anthony.
Let's just take some questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Zibi. If we could take questions, first of all, from journalists present. Could I start at the end, please? If you could introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Paul Vickyard from... Hi, can you hear me? Paul Vickyard from Bloomberg. You talked about the DA and ANC. So if it comes to a coalition, which of those parties would you prefer to work for? Or work with, I should say, in coalition on national and provincial levels? And then what would your conditions be to be part of a coalition with either of those? And then as part of that as well is what would make you refuse to work with either of those parties?
And legislatures and oversight as well, because they're important. And the question is, between these two arms of our state, what does cooperation look like? Whether you are in government or not, how does oversight look like? Who plays that role? Does the same party that holds a ministry also chair the portfolio committee that oversees the same government department? It's a much more serious conversation that we often make it to be. One of the disqualifiers is any condition that to get into a coalition, two things have got to happen. Either they must be protected from prosecution, or they must not be prosecuted in future in the event that they steal. That's a red line we cannot cross with anyone. Because this country has got where it has got to, because hundreds of billions get stolen and wasted every day. We cannot be party to the same again. Take from that answer, Paul, what its implications are. I think it disqualifies a few political parties. I hope I've helped. The second one, the ANC's tentacles. Thank you so much for asking that. The ANC will not be removed from society, not in an election, not via an election. Pastors are ANC members. Headmen are ANC members or believers in ANC politics, trade unionists and so on. This is why we've decided to stand on our own, to change how all of society sees and thinks about politics, so that in future you have trade unions who support RISE Mzansi, trade unionists who support RISE Mzansi. The same people who believe in this political idea
manifesto that you have identified corruption as a corrosive influence. But what is your position on supporting a carefully thought through pair of bills that the current Shadow Minister of Justice is going to be pushing your way shortly after the end of May?
And then one more from the back of the room.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mzansi. I just wondered, in order to exercise your political muscle, how many candidates have you got on your election list to be of any consequence to the overall result of this election? I wonder if you have enough. The second question is, in short, what is your ideology?
I think that's it for now.
Thank you. So the short answer, Paul, is that at the level of principle, we totally agree.
If you get a combination of the bad president and the bad government, our lives would change in an instant before you even had this vertigo. So what I'm trying to say is the work that people are doing for is not just about capitalize differences. That's why we talk so much about political reform as a whole, about electoral reform, about rebalancing the power after electoral reform between parliament and the executive, so that the executive does not have the extent of the discretion that it has now. About government transparency, compulsory government transparency, so that civil society and journalists and so on can expect to get certain information at certain intervals and not have to go through the parliament process, which the government always tries to frustrate. Right? So the way we've got to do is more comprehensive, and it's in our manifesto. So sure, to the one suggestion and the level of principle, but we've got to do more work, because it is in illuminating the work and decisions of government in the light of day that we finally get accountability. It's not which party it is whether the rules we have in place force those in power to account without the standard. Because if we do, then you have fewer standards. Let me start with the ideological question. So we published a document last year called Our Politics on our website. It states very clearly that we have chosen a social democratic path with the values of social democracy, with freedom, equality, solidarity, and justice, and we added integrity to that. So those are the 5 values of RISE Mzansi. In Europe, to simplify, we are trying to become a Germany or a Sweden. Hopefully you like that. But it's really it is absolute. It's not complicated. I was telling the economist last week or 2 weeks ago that in Europe we will be regarded as a normal centrist party. And that's what we have. We think the ideological center in South Africa, in terms of how South Africans think and understand the purpose of politics, is social democratic. We believe our constitution is social democratic. We believe that jurisprudence coming out of the constitutional court over the last 30 years is social democratic. you were the person who first alerted me to the importance of the dispute over the legitimacy of the Zulu king. It seems to me that if you go back to 2017, when Cyril Ramaphosa was elected, there was an unfortunate spin-off of that conference and election that marginalized the KwaZulu-Natal. It marginalized the people in the ANC, particularly, of course, because of things like Zulu Makiza getting for corruption and so forth. But the outcome was, to me, a red light to a flashing and marginalized a very important problem. Now, add to that the legitimacy of the Zulu king, which is before the courts, and it's clearly very serious about it. Is it not a surprise that the very astute, somewhat Machiavellian, Zuma has emerged as the new Zulu king? Your comments. Thank you. So, job creation. So, one of my pet peeves throughout has been the term job creation. There's nothing called job creation. Do not create jobs in the way that our politicians tend to pose it. If that were true, we have lots of jobs, we simply create them. The question is about understanding why the economy is not growing, it's not growing inclusively, and why so many people remain outside the system and not being there. There is 3 to 4 percentage points GDP growth between ESCOM and Transnet. The Reserve Bank says this in every monetary policy statement. Anyone who promises jobs but is not going to fix this too is lying. It's lying. There is another problem. It's crime. I come from Tata, or from KSD, come from near Tata. And this is true in Matatiel, in the townships in Cape Town, in Joburg, and so on, that people don't even want to start a small shop because they get killed or suffer from extortion gangs and so on. Right? Again, that's another job killer. It's crime. And then there's local and regional infrastructure, which has completely collapsed. And so on. What am I trying to say? The solution to growing this economy has more to do with removing the constraints and the chokehold of the economy than genius ideas that everybody has thought about. We need to go back to do the basics. That is why in our manifesto we say leadership and implementation and effectiveness of government and smart policy making and good choices about where to deploy money remain the best way to create jobs. But we've also offered another solution to a problem, which is the 48% of kids who never pass matric. Join the rest who don't get to secure a post-matric qualification. They make up between 88 and 92% of the unemployed. If you look at the last 7 or 8 quarters of the quarterly labor force, if you don't have a skill, it's incredibly difficult to get anything other than this job. And the ANC has resigned itself to giving people these jobs, right? Talking only about job opportunities in the expanded public works group. So that's why we talk about bespoke training opportunities for people with either no matric or with matric, so that they have a basis for looking for a job. Otherwise, it's really hopeless hope. And that young men are referred to falls in that category. And so I want to give everyone a chance to ask questions, but I think I've given you an idea for our integrated approach to helping the economy grow, helping investment is. I'll give the money last, and since you said that you just asking as an aside. So the emergence of MK and the dynamics in KZN, I'll just say a couple of things, John, and that is, MK is very serious roots in KZN in particular, particularly on the ANC, the INP and the EFF in particular. It has also led to us having to retract around with work to kind of make sure that people are still with us in that sense. But what John is referring to, for those who don't know, is that there's a court case ongoing about who should be killed in KZN. And I think that it's a situation that makes the point actually about said earlier about leaders' ability to be connected to the sinews of South African society that we don't get connected. Because that court case, depending on how it goes, could have consequences that are not good in terms of stability and who's happy with the outcome and who's not happy with the outcome. I want to comment on who should be king. The only thing I note is that sometimes you wish you had a credible political leader or president who could have an effect on that dispute such that it is resolved outside the courts. Because I don't think the court decision will be the end of it. But we have such a depth of leadership, John, that there is a risk that any tensions that arise in case ahead may be used opportunistically by bad politicians such as our former president to make things more difficult for the rest of us. I hope it won't get there, but I do wish we had somebody with the gravitas to deal with it. Finally, you know, fundraising, I've since discovered that the worst part of politics is actually looking for money. But we're fortunate to have hundreds of donors, some big, most small.